You step into a steel shaft that drops 500 feet into total darkness, and one wrong move means you never step out again. This is not a job people think about until the elevator stops moving and they are trapped between floors. But somebody has to climb into that shaft and fix it. That person can walk away making more money than most people with a 4-year degree, all without ever setting foot in a classroom past high school. Level 1. You start as an apprentice, and the first thing you learn is that nobody trusts you with anything that moves. You are handed a broom, a bucket, and a list of parts to carry to mechanics twice your age who will not even look at you when you speak. The pay is barely above minimum wage, something like $17 an hour, and you spend most of your day in the back of a van driving between job sites, watching men work on machines that could kill you in half a second if you touch the wrong wire at the wrong time. You get yelled at for standing in the wrong spot. You get yelled at for asking too many questions. You get yelled at for not asking enough. The union apprenticeship you signed up for is 4 years long, and everyone around you tells you that most people quit before year 2, that the dropout rate in this trade is higher than almost any other union job in the country. You watch guys your age walk off the job site after one bad day and never come back, and you start wondering which one you are going to be. Your hands are raw from carrying cable reels that weigh more than you do, and at night you go home smelling like grease and hydraulic fluid, scrubbing your fingernails in the sink and wondering if this was a mistake. You think about your friends who went to college, sitting in warm classrooms while you stand in a freezing machine room at 6 in the morning, holding a flashlight for someone who has not said your name once in 3 weeks. But here is what nobody tells you at this stage. The men who are screaming at you right now are the exact same men who are going to vouch for you when it is time to test for your license. Every insult, every correction, every moment they made you redo something for the 4th time, that is them building the version of you that survives in a shaft alone. The ones who make it through this level are not the strongest or the smartest. They are simply the ones who refuse to quit, and that alone puts you ahead of almost everyone who ever tries this trade. Level 2. 2 years in, you finally get handed a set of tools with your name engraved on them. And this is where the job stops being about carrying things and starts being about staying alive. You are lowered into elevator shafts on a platform smaller than a dinner table, working above and below moving counterweights that weigh more than a car, in spaces so tight you can feel the vibration of the machine through your boots before you even see it move. One mechanic in your local district lost 3 fingers because he reached into a running motor without locking it out first. You hear that story on your first week working the shaft, told to you in a flat, quiet voice by a coworker who was standing right next to him when it happened, and it never leaves your head again. Every time you reach toward a panel now, some part of your brain checks and rechecks the lock because the story is not a warning anymore, it is a memory that is not even yours but feels like it. Your pay jumps to around $26 an hour, which sounds like a win until you realize you are now doing overnight emergency calls, climbing into pitch-black shafts at 3 in the morning because a hospital elevator carrying a patient just stopped between floors, or a subway elevator packed with commuters has gone dead in the middle of rush hour. You are still not licensed, so every move you make is checked, corrected, and sometimes redone completely by the mechanic training you, and the frustration of doing something right only to be told you did it wrong builds in you like pressure with nowhere to go. The stakes are different now. It is not about being yelled at anymore. It is about knowing that if you misjudge one clearance, one gap, one moving part, you do not get a second chance to learn from it. This is the level where most apprentices either fall in love with the danger, feeling more alive in that shaft than anywhere else in their life, or they quit and never look back, telling people for the rest of their life about the few years they spent working on elevators before they found something safer. Level 3. You pass your state license exam, and overnight the entire industry looks at you differently. You are now a certified elevator mechanic, and your pay jumps to somewhere between $45,000 and $60,000 a year depending on your local union contract. The apprentice who once could not touch a panel without supervision is now trusted to walk into a building alone, diagnose the problem, and fix it without anyone standing behind him to catch a mistake. You start seeing the real range of what this job throws at you. Hydraulic elevators in old apartment buildings running on wiring from the 1970s that should have been replaced decades ago. High-speed traction elevators in glass office towers moving at 22 feet per second, fast enough that your ears pop on the way up. Freight elevators in warehouses carrying 10,000 pounds of steel, where one frayed cable could crush an entire loading dock crew below. Every building is a different puzzle, and the manuals do not always match what you actually find behind the panel, because someone rewired it wrong 30 years ago and nobody ever documented it. You learn to trust your hands and your instincts over the paperwork, tracing wires by feel in the dark when your flashlight batteries die halfway through a job, because the elevator still needs to run in an hour regardless of what excuse you bring back to the office. Word starts spreading about which mechanics are fast and which mechanics are careless, and you do not want to be the second one, because in this industry your reputation follows you into every building you ever walk into again. The money is good now, good enough to buy a house, good enough that your friends stop asking when you are going back to school. But the toll on your body is already showing. Your knees ache from climbing pit ladders every single day. Your back aches from bracing against machine rooms the size of a closet. This is the level where the job either becomes a career or becomes a slow countdown to burnout. Level 4. You specialize, and this is where the real money starts showing up. Some mechanics move toward adjusting the highly technical work of fine-tuning an elevator's leveling, speed, and door timing to the exact standard required by code, work so precise that a fraction of a second in timing can be the difference between passing inspection and shutting an entire building down. Others move toward modernization, ripping out 50-year-old systems in landmark buildings and replacing them with computerized controls, a job that can pay over $100,000 a year because so few mechanics in the entire region are skilled enough to do it properly. You are now the person other mechanics call when they are stuck, the name that gets passed around when a job has already gone wrong twice and the building cannot afford a third failure. A building superintendent does not want to hear that the elevator will be down for a week. They want it running by the end of the day, and that pressure sits directly on your shoulders every time your phone rings. You start working on machines connecting to skyscraper elevators moving faster than 60 feet per second, systems where a half-second delay in the software can mean the difference between a smooth stop and a jolt that terrifies everyone standing inside. The specialization also means the danger gets sharper, not softer. High-speed traction systems carry forces that can kill instantly if a safety brake fails during testing, and you are the one testing it, standing inches from components rated to stop tons of falling steel, trusting your own calculations over a printed manual written for a different building entirely. You start noticing that the mechanics who reach this level are not necessarily the ones who worked the hardest. They are the ones who stayed curious long after everyone else stopped asking questions. This is the level where you stop being just a mechanic and start being the expert everyone in the building quietly depends on without ever knowing your name. You walk past tenants in the lobby every single day, and none of them realize that the reason they made it to work on time this morning is because you spent 4 hours the night before recalibrating a system that could have trapped 40 people between floors. Level 5. You become a master mechanic, and the industry now treats you as a walking manual, the person younger mechanics whisper about before you even walk onto a job site. Your pay climbs past $110,000 a year, sometimes closer to $130,000 once overtime and emergency call pay are factored in, numbers that would have sounded impossible to the kids sweeping floors a decade earlier. You are the one training the apprentices who remind you of yourself all those years ago, standing there terrified, holding a flashlight, getting yelled at for asking too many questions. Except now you are the one they are terrified of disappointing, and some nights you catch yourself softening a correction because you remember exactly what it felt like to be on the other end of it. You handle the jobs nobody else in the company wants to touch, elevators in hospitals that cannot go down for more than an hour without risking lives, historic buildings with 100-year-old cable systems that no manufacturer even makes parts for anymore, forcing you to machine replacement parts yourself in a back shop after hours. Every call you take now carries weight because if you cannot fix it, the company has to bring in an outside specialist and quietly admit that even their best mechanic could not solve it. That thought sits in the back of your mind on every difficult job, not fear exactly, but the awareness that your reputation is the only thing standing between the company and an embarrassing phone call to a competitor. The stress is constant, but so is the respect, and respect in this trade means something because it is earned in shafts and machine rooms, not handed out in an office. Younger mechanics watch how you move through a machine room, memorizing the way you diagnose a problem in minutes that would take them hours, the way your hands move toward the exact right panel before you have even finished explaining what is wrong. This is the level where the job stops feeling like a job and starts feeling like a craft you have spent your entire adult life mastering. One shaft, one panel, 1-3 in the morning emergency call at a time. Level 6. You move into a supervisor or foreman role, and the machines you once worked with your own hands become machines you now manage through other people's hands, watching from a distance while someone else takes the risks you used to take without a second thought. Your pay reaches past $150,000 a year, but the danger shifts from physical to something heavier, responsibility that follows you home every single night. You are no longer the one climbing into the shaft, you are the one who signed off on the safety plan for the mechanic who is down there right now while you sit in an office 2 buildings away. If something goes wrong now, it is not just a mistake, it is a decision you made that failed, and that distinction changes everything about how you sleep at night. You manage crews across multiple job sites, negotiate contracts with building owners who want repairs done faster and cheaper than is safely possible, and mediate between corporate executives who only care about deadlines and mechanics who only care about staying alive. You still know every inch of the machine room, the knowledge never leaves you, but now your hands are on paperwork, budgets, and liability forms instead of cables and motors, and some days you miss the shaft more than you expected to. The respect you built over 15 years is the only thing keeping your crew from cutting corners when you are not standing over them, and every single day tests whether that respect actually holds up under pressure. A building owner screaming about lost revenue does not care that your mechanic needs another hour to do the job safely, and it falls on you to hold that line without losing the contract. This is the level where leadership becomes the actual job, not the machines, not the shafts, but the people, the schedules, the phone calls at 11 at night when a crew member tells you something feels wrong and you have to decide from a desk whether to pull them off the job entirely.